Welcome to Way Back When, Big Blend Radio's history podcast. Welcome, everyone. Today we are thrilled to have professor, historian, and award-winning author of over 30 books. My gosh, Matthew Restall joining us. His new book is out now, and it is called The 9 Lives of Christopher Columbus. There's a lot of myths and stories about Christopher Columbus, and this book really dives into it. I encourage you to go to his website, MatthewRestall.com. So that's linked in the episode notes as always. So welcome, Matthew. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me on the show, Lisa. Thank you.
So Christopher Columbus, we all kind of go back into our brains of being in high school, right? Or even in school, elementary school even, right? But then when we start traveling the world, he starts popping up everywhere. And it seems that he's got a lot of stories about him. So there's like almost more than one Christopher Columbus. It kind of reminds me of Jesse James, how his story got shifted and changed throughout Western history and dime store novels and things like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, everybody knows something about Columbus, and what's amazing to me is how everybody knows something different. Like no two people that I have spoken to have the exact same set of ideas and bits of knowledge and memories from school and so on as each other. It's absolutely astonishing. And half the stuff that people say, well, this is probably wrong, but this is what I've taught. I'm like, actually, no, that I would say that's pretty well evidenced. And I would agree with that. And then the other half is things like people will say, well, I was taught when I was in school that Columbus discovered America, meaning the United States. I just can't remember whether they told us he went to Virginia or Florida or whatever it was. And I'm guessing that's probably not true. I'm like, yep, you're right. That's definitely not true. He never landed anywhere, never saw anywhere that it became the United States. Although I suppose technically there could be a Puerto Rico loophole there, right?
Okay. Well, that's interesting because, people don't like him here very much. There's a lot of, especially on the Native American side, they do not like Christopher Columbus. And in fact, we have Christopher Columbus Day on October 11th, and that is, or not, well, it's October 11th this year, but that holiday has created drama. And I even know where we travel full time, kind of like Christopher Columbus. We were based out of Tucson. There was even a Columbus Park. And then you think of the Knights of Columbus, this city park. People started spray painting over the sign. They were so upset that a city park. So what can we say to everyone who's mad at him?
Yeah, I mean there's so many different ways to kind of jump into this topic, right? And that's the whole point with the 9 lives. The structure there is about all the different Columbuses. So, and I hope it's kind of signaled, in the title. That first of all, it's supposed to be kind of intriguing. So we're like, what does he mean by 9 lives? What are these 9 lives? And it doesn't mean, the feline metaphor, like a cat, doesn't mean to say he cheated death 8 times in his lifetime. And it doesn't mean that. It means there were sort of 9 different Columbuses. And that's what I have tried to kind of explain, but also as a way to help people to understand why there are so many different opinions about him and so many little bits of myth history and these sort of stories that are based on truth, but then evolve in different ways. And also, as you said, like, why is there a park in Tucson, Arizona, named after Columbus that other people are upset about and are spray painting? Like that to me is totally fascinating and is a kind of an entry point, a kind of a teaching moment or a discussion moment, that allows us to then dive into so many things. And actually, I could begin with that and we could go for hours and hours and hours, right? Just explaining.
You went down the rabbit hole.
How do you begin? You've got to go all the way back to the beginning. You kind of have to say, well, look, okay, indigenous peoples, migrated in tens of thousands of years ago. Yeah, you have to go that far back to explain why there's this conflict. And in the course of that, you end up going all the way forward through into American history, meaning U.S. history, and the 19th century when America is being really kind of created. That's in cultural terms, right? That's political, culturally. That's when the great debate is waging. It's still going on today, but that's kind of when it really, really gets going in the 19th century. What is the United States? What is its identity? What makes it different from other countries? Who gets to decide that? Who gets to be excluded from that conversation? And so on. I mean, it's
that's a good time now.
Exactly. I totally agree. I couldn't possibly have anticipated that.
Yeah.
I mean, they said let's hold the book. It was finished about a year ago, and they said let's put it out on Columbus Day / Indigenous Peoples Day in 2025, because then
Wow.
it's important for the press to help promote the book, to put it at the timing is
Sure.
perfect. Absolutely. But honestly, I don't think I could have anticipated the degree to which this whole thing of what is America, who gets to decide that, would be so pertinent right now. And
Mm,
Columbus is very much a part of that. And it's probably just as well I didn't anticipate it, because then that way I don't bore or annoy people by constantly trying to make connections in the book to the present day. They can make those connections themselves very
mm.
easily. The material is just right. I think it surprised me when I was doing the research how often I came across something that somebody had said, 20 years ago or 200 years ago, that seemed kind of pertinent to today's discussions.
It's fascinating to me because when you think about him going and sailing off, I think these expeditions and explorers are just mind blowing. And yes, and I know this is where a lot of us kind of like forgive who he is. We have this negative connotation of him, but then we go, but look what he did. And so we try to balance those out, in that. And you think about explorers. I mean, they're nuts to just go off. There's sharks and things in there. And apparently he likes certain animals for certain things. Is that true? I got in trouble talking about a biography on Benjamin Franklin because the
Um,
biographer really got in. It's like a Bible, the book. And I was really fascinated. And then the biographer was kind of going that there is a possibility Benjamin Franklin is gay because of all the women. And he just went into this whole thing, and I brought it up, and like people on podcasts, people got mad at me. So now are you getting in trouble with what you've written on Christopher
People got
Columbus?
mad because
I
they didn't
want
want
to
to believe they
Benjamin Franklin
might
may
have
be
been
bisexual or
right or
gay.
something. Right.
Yeah, they didn't want to believe that. Somebody got yelled at me on a podcast over
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I
It's
mean,
kind of
am I
interesting.
in trouble over Columbus? Not
And
yet.
having his sexual orientations out there, and people are going out and saying things about that. So how did you handle that part?
Yeah, I mean, with Columbus, let me sort of back up. I
Hmm.
wanted to approach all of these little stories and myth histories and misconceptions and so on. I wanted to approach all of them with an open mind, right? That it seemed to me that there's no point writing another book about Columbus if you're trying to push a particular agenda. There's new books coming out all the
Yeah.
time. There's one just came out that, by it does. I'm not going to tell you who the historian is. I can't remember. It's a historian in Spain. It's in Spanish, but by a historian, whose work I respect. He's all hung up on the idea that Columbus was secretly Jewish, and clearly has this idea in his head right from the get-go. And so it taints all of the other ways in which he's trying to be kind of objective. So I really wanted to be kind of open-minded about that,
Yeah.
even though I do have opinions. And now I got book got a great review in the New York Times, which the reviewer said, Russell says he's going to be open-minded about everything, but he can't help himself by giving us opinions and busting myths. And I try to kind of strike a balance there, right? Because I think for the reader, you can let the reader make up his or her own mind. But it's always better if you say, well, this is my opinion and this is why, and here's the evidence. And if you think I'm stretching the evidence too far or missing things, then I'm going to make it easy for you to kind of do that rather than hitting the reader over their head and kind of shaping the evidence. So this whole issue that you talk about, like Christopher Columbus's like sex and love life, was
Yeah.
something I had to deal with because there's so many different stories out there. And I thought I got to try and connect these together and explain them. And I wasn't sure. I mean, I thought I knew who he was in that regard, but I wasn't sure. And I was prepared for it to go kind of in any possible direction. And in fact, the conclusion that I came to, and this is just one of his lives, is, the lover, right? Um, and not to give it away because I want readers to be intrigued,
Mhm.
listeners to be intrigued enough to become readers. But who's he a lover of himself? I mean,
Mhm.
that's really what I concluded. It's all about him. And he's not really interested in kind of sex and romance.
Yeah.
It's those relationships don't work for him in terms of his kind of personal narcissism, if you like, his ego, his ambition. He's a great driving social ambition to rise up
Hmm.
from being an illiterate, impoverished sailor from Genoa to being a Spanish nobleman. And he achieves that. He wants to found a noble dynasty, an aristocratic dynasty. He achieves it. There, he is given the title of Admiral of the Ocean Sea. Ocean Sea is what Southern Europeans call the Atlantic Ocean. It's a very important title. It might sound a little odd to us, but it's a big deal. The 20th Admiral of the Ocean Sea is a Spanish nobleman today. The
Yeah.
20th. In line, and his name is Don Cristobal Colon. In other words, his name is Christopher Columbus. So he not only succeeded, but we're talking like 500 years, more than 500
Yeah.
years later. So that is an astonishing thing. And here I'm kind of looping back to something else you said, because there was kind of another question that was kind of buried in there about when you were talking about Benjamin Franklin. What do we do when we are impressed by somebody who we feel uncomfortable treating in a heroic way? So I had this conversation all the time with students about people like, let's just say Napoleon, right?
Mm.
Because Napoleon was talked about a lot a couple of years ago. There was a new movie that what Napoleon did was really impressive. And so I got a lot of students say, that's really amazing that he was able to do that. I said, yes, it is. But you do realize that these amazing things that Napoleon did result in literally millions of people being immiserated, being slaughtered,
Hmm.
having family members killed, being sent into poverty. I mean, all of this, it's like, this guy is like catastrophic
Yeah.
in terms of the impact he has. So let me get back up to Columbus. Is Columbus one of those guys? Do we
Yeah.
assign him? I would say this is where he's a great figure to have a conversation about, because it's not cut and dried. I don't think we can attribute all of this stuff to him. And it doesn't matter whether you are pro or against Columbus, where you approach him saying, he was sort of the architect of genocide and the slave trade and so on, or whether you say, no, 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 he's a hero. And, I hope when you read the book, you see, okay, those are two different Columbuses.
Right.
We're not arguing over the same Columbus. This is what he did in his lifetime, and this is who he was. Can we attribute everything that happens since then to him, good or bad? No, he was part of a process. So let's understand better that process of exploration and so on. And that's not the same as the American Columbus and then the Italian American Columbus, who are two separate Columbuses.
And
They're
Spain, by the way.
related, right? It's all kind
Yeah.
of avatars of the same figure. But in each one there's key or core elements that differentiate that Columbus from the others.
I find this really fascinating in that you're like writing the history of the world in a way, right? And you're having to understand how people lived. And we also have like, the story kind of reminds me of Andrew Jackson, who was terrible to the indigenous people, as we know. He was
Right.
horrible, but there wouldn't be New Orleans without him. So, and the Indians actually came to work with him to win the Battle of New Orleans. So you have to go, okay, here's this horrible man who had diarrhea during that war, which I thought was funny. Sorry, but it was. And he helps save New Orleans. So there's this nice thing, but you have to kind of also realize these are what everyone was pushing to do at Columbus. I don't think you can be a sweet, nice little person going out in the ocean. And then, I don't know, at that time humans are not what we were back then and what we are today are two different things. Yet we can carry some of those really horrible traits through and use them in a different way, if that makes sense. When
Yeah.
you look at history, like we've changed as society, but we still have some brutal, horrible people in there,
There's like three different fascinating things you just said in there, and I don't know which one to pick up on. But yeah, I mean, moral relativism. Can we judge somebody like Columbus based on the moral standards of our day? Yes, we can. Of course, we can. We can be like, this is terrible. He did this and this and this is terrible. It's not hard to find him saying things, writing things to the monarchs, to Queen Isabel, talking about what a great idea it would be to enslave indigenous peoples in the Caribbean, ship them back to Spain, which is what had already been happening. And, we can totally judge it. But here's the catch. And this is not me now like pivoting around to to defend Columbus. This is me shunting Columbus aside. And that this is just a kind of a point that I hope gets across in the book, that if all we do is talk about Columbus, we're missing out on talking about the first interesting thing you said a moment ago, Lisa, that this is really about the history of the world. What really we're talking about is almost the entire world, but certainly the Atlantic world, Europe, Africa, and Asia. I mean, Europe, Africa, and the Americas, going back the last 500 years. As I just said, it's like Columbus is not responsible for everything. If we put him aside, what does that open up in terms of kind of our understanding? And then we can see, oh, okay, Columbus writing this about enslaving indigenous peoples is shocking to us, except what's more shocking, or what should be more shocking, is that was absolutely a part of how Europeans conceived of the enterprise of imperial expansion. And that there's a process here that begins before Columbus's life and extends centuries and centuries on towards our time of imperial expansion. This idea that it's okay to travel around the world and invade another country and do whatever you need to do, whether it's you want to enslave people and slaughter them, or you want to convert them to your religion and make them work for you, or whatever it is. I mean, there's various different ways in which colonialism is practiced in the Americas. It's not all the same, but whatever it is, there's always this idea of like, well, what we've done is something that on the face of it is completely piratical, right? It's absolutely unjustified, raw aggression, just going into your neighbor's house and taking everything you want, and it's plunder and murder and so on. But now let's come up with a really elaborate system for justifying it, a religious one, cultural one, right? We've got to come up with all these ideas that sort of support. And so that then leads us into people saying, okay, I get all the terrible things that will happen, but isn't it true that without Columbus we don't get, American democracy, right? So these are kind of the through lines that people want to make, and my response to that is, let's talk about it. I don't want to reject anybody's opinion and be disrespectful of other people's opinion. It's important to understand where that comes from. I understand where that comes from. And you know what? It takes us back into Columbus. This idea that, of American exceptionalism, that America has achieved something that no other human society achieved. And therefore, you've got to, according to this argument, you have to have respect for all the things that led to that, right? And it gets you into all kinds of sort of tricky territory. And it takes you into 19th century America. I mean, you talked about Jackson. This is like absolutely we're in like the Jackson era. Jackson, obviously, you can imagine his opinion of Columbus as a heroic figure, right? That's why the United States invents its own Columbus. Creates his own Columbus, who has really nothing to do with any of these negative things, or if he does, he's attached to them in a way that is positive. So in the middle of the 19th century, indigenous peoples are seen as barbaric and need to be removed. They either have to become assimilated or else they have to be removed or killed, right? That's part of what is happening in the country. So you get all this Columbus imagery of Columbus, the classic one, which they talk about in the book, a statue which is in front of the U.S. Capitol for 100 years. It's not there now, of Columbus holding up a globe of the world, and then behind him is cowering a half-naked indigenous woman. And so this is kind of this really blatant, raw symbol of civilization versus barbarism that justifies, the entire enterprise. That's really fascinating to me, and is important for us to kind of talk about. Like, how's that come about? Do we want that to be how we think of our country? Is that the kind of the core identity of America? Is there some pieces of that we want to save and jettison other pieces? And that helps to understand what happened. Let's circle back to the park in Tucson. You look at that statue and the arguments over that statue and how prominent it was, how every president is inaugurated from, now I'm off the top of my head not remembering, but Lincoln to Kennedy and a couple like before and after, right? All the way through, right next to this statue. They're inaugurated on the steps there in front of the Capitol. And yet now, just a park called Columbus gets splattered with red paint. These things all make sense. They all kind of connect through.
Well, it's fascinating to me because I didn't grow up here. I grew up in Kenya, England, and South Africa. And going back to Kenya and then maybe South Africa was more like 8 years old. I'd never heard Christopher Columbus being put out there as negative. I was taught, this is someone to look to because he was brave and he changed the world for the better because of his exploration of the seas. He was promoted. So it was only here coming back to this country and probably over the last 20, 30 years that I started to realize he wasn't all that nice. So I don't know what the curriculums are, different, or maybe it was just time frame. When did all that change? I mean, has America always looked at him as that way? I'm really like trying to go back.
No,
yeah.
I
Okay.
don't. There's so the short answer is no. It really goes back to the quincentennial. There's the kind of the counter narrative begins in the 1980s as a reaction against efforts clearly begin to make 1992 a repeat of 1892. And 1892, the quadricentennial, was absolutely massive. That was the kind of most covered news event in the United States that whole year was the quadricentennial. The fair, the Columbian Exposition that was built on the edges of Chicago, which was the biggest World's Fair to date at that time, and in some ways the biggest ever. I mean, they built a building there that was the largest building in the United States at the time, for example. I mean, so it was only up for like a year, right? I mean, this thing was absolutely massive, and it was the absolute peak of kind of the adoration of Columbus as an American icon. I mean, it's really important to stress, and I hope it's clear when you get to that life in the book. It's actually the 8th of the 9 lives. The person being adored is an American who's been created by Americans, and it's about American patriotism. I mean, all kinds of things stem from that Columbus moment. For example, children reciting the Pledge of Allegiance in elementary school. It dates from 1892. Coincidentally, it's from the year of the quadricentennial. So, the attempt to repeat that in the 1980s prompted a reaction because there had been cultural shifts, right? Like attitude towards Indigenous people had changed a huge amount in the intervening 100 years. We go back 100 years before that, they couldn't even vote. They had no rights at all. There were literally, I'm not exaggerating, but literally genocidal official policies in place in parts of the country, bring in, the scalps of Indigenous people and you get paid and so on. And so now we're forward to the 1980s, a very different place. America is very different in that regard. So what that does is it changes the perception of Columbus and it creates kind of a crisis. I tried to track it through children's books. I actually spent a lot of time going through all the children's books. And it didn't end up being a big part of the book because there was pages and pages about children's books and it was too much of a distraction. I felt it sort of hindered the flow of the narrative. And so it got cut down a lot and there's some stuff in footnotes. But anyway, the point, which I can tell you right now, didn't need pages and pages of explanation, which is that Columbus is presented as a hero beginning in the 18th century. It's a very kind of simple stripping away of Columbus into this kind of rugged individual who was, very pious and, loved God and didn't give up. And he was sort of a model. He was presented to children, particularly to young boys. And in fact, if you go back far enough, only to boys, as a kind of a role model. This is what you want to be. You want to, respectfully never give up.
Yeah.
That's it. You want to, take chances, rise to challenges, be brave. And even when people don't appreciate you, you kind of keep going, it's like, and it's all kind of tied to a set of American values. And so that's in the children's literature all the way up into the 1980s. There's the beginning of and it was also unfortunate that, also Indigenous peoples died. And then you get into the 90s and noughties, writers of children don't know what to do with Columbus because now Columbus is being seen in negative terms in terms of violence. And so in a children's book, you don't want to deal with, it's supposed to be a book about Columbus. How do you deal with the fact that Indigenous population maybe fell by as much as 90% in the 100 years after his first voyage? How do you deal with something like that? And the fact that some people want to blame him directly, some indirectly, other people like, no, it wasn't him as part of a larger, whatever.
Wow. So your book, your research had to be insane to get all of this and put it together into something we can all read and follow through. Because, like I was saying, it's like the history of the world. You think of where he's been, how it was changed. That's why I was asking, like, because where we were in Africa was still, Kenya was colonial as heck. It was colonial, and African people were not treated very nice. Sorry for saying that, but it was really true. With wonder about all that. And then South Africa is very much a explorer country. So explorers like Vasco da Gama was a big deal. All of that is huge. And then you come to the States. I think this is really timely. We bring it up with America 250 coming up. I mean, everyone's looking at, we're going to be 250 years old as a nation. So where do we go from here? So I think this is really good timing for that too. I mean, just amazing.
Yeah, so just take, for example, the topic of immigration. Immigration it's a hot topic in America right now. And people have said, why, people are more worried about immigration now than any time in American history, right? Like, because we always think of whatever's going on right now as being bigger than it's happened before, worse or better, depending on your perspective, than anything that's happened before, right? Because it's happening to us and it's happening right in our country now. But the fact is that arguments over immigration, kind of crisis conversations and policy making over immigration has always been a part of this country's history. And there have been many moments in the past where this debate has been way more fraught, and there have been even greater levels of violence against immigrant populations and greater attempts to stop people coming in and so on. This is nothing new at all. And that's part of the Columbus story. And that was one of the things that was most fascinating to me and surprising to me, and yes, required me to go down these research rabbit holes that I hadn't gone down before, and to understand topics in history that I hadn't written about before, like the history of Italian immigration. But I thought I knew something about that, but digging deep into that, it was just amazing to me, the sheer quantity of Italians coming almost all through New York in just a few, maybe in a half-century period. There's like 4 million people. Depending on how you kind of cut the data and the statistics, in some ways, that's the greatest immigration moment in human history. That many people in that concentrated period of time. Right? No one wants to take the Italian American out of America. The Italian Americans, I don't think anybody does. That's an important part of
Don't take my pizza away. Yeah.
Exactly. But when you go back, it's like, oh no, people did want to take it out. The people weren't happy about it. The discrimination that Italian immigrants faced was absolutely massive and was horrific. And that helps to explain the Italian American Columbus. It's like, go all the way back and see that particular, why was he created? He was created out of the American Columbus as a different icon. And one that was still absolutely about patriotism. That's the whole point. The American Columbus is about patriotism. And so the Italian American Columbus is about Italian Americans being as American as they are Italian, a part of their journey from being Italian immigrants to being Italian Americans to being Americans of Italian descent. And Columbus is absolutely a part of that. And understanding that, I think, helps us to see how we can have fruitful conversations about Columbus to help us understand each other, rather than throwing red paint and doing acts of. I'm not against throwing red paint. I mean, people, like protests and demonstrations and so on. It's all part of being in a democracy. But we don't want to only have people throwing red paint. It's good to have some.
And have some. I think that's what books are so great. It gives people this time to reflect and learn. I wanted to go in closing here. You're getting us all to think and realize different things we may not know, and it is definitely a book that can give people to talk and have a conversation. But what led you down the giant rabbit hole?
Yeah, that's like a good point to end on, is how I got myself into this in the beginning. And, I didn't think the world needed another Columbus book. And I got my degree, my history degree, in 1992 by chance in California. And, I was sort of observing all of this quincentennial stuff and all the new books that were coming out about Columbus. And I just thought, I'm never going to write one of these. There's just, it's just the same stuff over and over. You know, there's a couple of books that were really good, so I don't need to write one. And then there's lots of stuff which is pushing a particular partisan position on Columbus, and I
Uh-huh.
don't need to add to that. But I couldn't ignore him because I was embarking on a career as a professor of Latin American history and Atlantic history. And so I was teaching him for decades, talking about him, reading about him, writing a little bit here and there. But it never occurred to me that I would ever imagine that there was a space for a new Columbus book. Like that would just, if someone had said, "Oh, someone's got a new Columbus book," I'm like, "No," I'd roll my eyes. Is there something new? And then someone would say, "Well, maybe they found a document, a lost document that's going to change how we view Columbus." I'm like, "No, it's Columbus. So there aren't lost documents. Everything has been gone over and so on. So why? What made me change my mind? It was an experience I had, and I tell this story at the beginning, and I know you know this because you looked at the book. I tell this at the beginning of the book. I'm essentially on a vacation in Spain visiting friends in the Spanish province of Galicia or Galicia with my family, and friends introduce me to neighbors, and the conversation comes up about what I do for a living, and they say, "Oh, well, no wonder you're here because you probably know that Columbus is actually from here." "You mean another Columbus? What Columbus?" "No, no, no. Like the guy who discovered America, you know, Christopher Columbus, Cristobal Colon. He wasn't from Genoa. He was from here. He was a local nobleman. He changed his name in 1492 to Columbus, to Colon, and then went off and discovered the New World." I said, "We even still have the castle where he lived. We can go show you." So I get taken to the castle, medieval castle, beautifully restored, gardens, and you can walk through. It's open to visitors, and there's little historical plaques that tell you about the history of the castle, including that the guy whose castle it was, his name was Pedro Madruga, that he changed his name to Columbus. And that was kind of mind blowing for me. And I realized just in that moment, like standing outside that castle, it came to me, even the title of the book, The 9 Lives of Christopher Columbus. I realized that the original angle is understanding how there are all these different Columbuses and how they all connect. And I did think at that moment, that's such a good book title, it must be already out there. Someone's already written it. Maybe there's a poem or a song or something with that title. And so I did spend some time trying to hunt down the title that no one, it turned out, had used. So it was apparently somehow popped into my head as an original thing, but also to see if it really was justified the book. So I thought every little bit of thing every little story about Columbus I kind of dug into and discovered, has this been written about? Well, I discovered an entire literature about how Columbus is actually, or was, a secret Jewish spy for the King of Portugal. So not just one book, but a whole literary tradition going all the way back to the 1890s, that he was secretly Jewish, Portuguese, not from Genoa, and was a spy. And also in some of these variants, he's a nobleman himself, right? So completely constructing a new
Yeah.
Columbus. And there's a whole pile of books on this. But what nobody had done was explain that phenomenon and connect it to the one that my friends told me about in Galicia, or connect it to Columbus abusing manatees, like that TikTok stuff, right? Or connecting it to what we just talked about with the Italian American immigration. All of these things, no one had connected them all together. And that's what I set
Yeah.
out to do, to see if it worked, to see if it held together and it helped to explain things. And the more I got into it, the more I realized all of these things are connected. It's all connected in a way that helps you kind of to understand all these little bits and pieces that seem a little bit incomprehensible, right? As people always say to me, like, why Columbus and manatees? I don't get it. Or why would Black Lives Matter protesters throw a Columbus statue in the Baltimore harbor? Like, why? Because did Columbus, did he start the transatlantic slave trade from Africa? No. So I don't get it. Why? And of course, it's perfectly comprehensible, right? It's not hard to
There's
understand. It's easy to explain. It makes sense, but only if you have it
all the
presented and
background.
explained to you what all the connections are. Yeah.
It's amazing. Can you go do Benjamin Franklin next?
Oh, there's so many brilliant historians of the United States. It would be you think it's foolish to write a book about Christopher Columbus for someone like me who spent his life writing about Latin American history. And the other books I've written that are nothing to do with this are on pop music. I
Oh,
had
I
a
like
book about
that.
Elton John come out this year. Oh,
Awesome.
they'll let me do that, but they're not going to let me write about Benjamin Franklin.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a true pleasure. And everyone, the book is out now. You can go to MatthewRestall.com, and that is linked in the episode notes as always. And again, the book title, The 9 Lives of Christopher Columbus. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on the show. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us here on Big Blend Radio's Way Back When History Podcast. Keep up with us at BigBlendRadio.com.